two of the learners that were that I was watching in the tape are in my class now, 6th graders, and one of the learners is particularly bright, and he dominated the conversation. And I don't think that I say that, but I don't mean that negatively. He just knew a lot, had a lot to say, and the girl he was partnered with just kind of accepted everything he said with a nod and an okay, and I agree with what you said. And I happen to have both of those kids in my class this year, and they're not partnered, and she does not respond that way when I see her this year. I see her as engaged and an active participant and raising her hand and saying, "I don't get it, explain it to me." And it's interesting. I'm not exactly sure why. Was it because she had a camera on her that during the taping? Was it because she was working with a boy and not a girl? I don't know what that was, but it's an interesting dynamic to
and that dynamic that you're explaining, I had in the tape a student named Charles sitting next to a girl named Jocelyn, and Charles was definitely one who got things very quickly, and Jocelyn would ask questions, and regularly she will ask questions, and she will state, "I don't get this yet." She's like, "Can you help me?" So it's the same type of dynamic that you're explaining, but in the videotape she allowed herself to be herself, and she's continued that as well as Charles. Charles is always asking questions, but as is Jocelyn. But I think one of the interesting things about Charles is that he's quick to arrive at an answer and deem it as being correct or right, and then feels that he can wash his hands and move on. And so I feel that with Charles, one of the challenges is to encourage him to dig deeper as a student and to allow himself to be challenged. And he's accustomed to things being easy for him. So when he experiences frustration, it really is a shutdown point for him. And that's what I want to work with Charles, is challenging him and still creating a support system or just a sense that he can push forward even though he's frustrated, and just make the realization that most students have that experience of frustration regularly, and they still push forward. So just trying to foster that perseverance with him.
I was going to say some of the surprises with the learners. The lesson that I taught wasn't in my own classroom, so when you watch the documented lesson, I have a seating chart, and I'm calling on students that I don't know. But I did do the re-engagement lesson in my own class, and what had occurred in Patty's classroom at Policita Middle School, the same issues came up in my own middle school. So it was surprising to see that even though I had done the re-engagement lesson at two different middle schools, the same ideas of labeling came up, proving your answer and justifying. A lot of kids were relying on the procedure, and when I asked them to prove it and justify it, it wasn't something new to them, but it was like, "What do you want me to do?" kind of thing. So it was just amazing to see it happen in two different schools at two different moments. So
I was really blown away with how passionate the learners in my class were about needing to understand. There was one case I remember very specifically was Maddie and Kelsey were talking about somebody else's work, and they're struggling to understand it, and Kelsey turns to Maddie and she says, "I don't get where this 4 comes from, please help, just help me figure this out." And that theme kind of happened in its own way in a couple of different groups in my class, and I was really proud to see that happening, because that's really powerful, and that's what you're trying to get at with discourse, is really embracing that moment when you don't get something and really seeking out that understanding.